In Norwood, Ohio, a brick smokestack still rises over a shopping center where a factory once stood. Most people walking by have no idea they are crossing the grave of a company that helped shape the American industrial century. The machines built there cut crankshafts for cars, bored gun barrels for 2 world wars, and trained generations of machinists. The company was LeBlond, and for nearly 100 years its name meant precision. Then a Japanese company bought it, erased the family from the door, and the old plant eventually became retail space. To understand why the company mattered, you have to understand the problem it solved. A gear or a crankshaft is not just metal. It is a part whose teeth, surfaces, and angles have to be exact, or the whole machine fails. In the late 1800s, making those parts was slow, manual, and full of error. A machinist cut one tooth, turned the blank by hand, cut the next, and hoped the spacing stayed true. That worked for simple jobs, but not for the industrial age that was coming. The man who solved that problem was Richard Knight LeBlond. He was born in 1864 near Cincinnati to a poor immigrant family. His father was a printer and Civil War veteran, but the family had little money. As a boy, LeBlond became obsessed with metal. The family story says he rigged a workbench in his bedroom and filed steel at night after the rest of the house went to sleep. He did not go to college. Instead, around age 15, he apprenticed at a local type foundry, learning the discipline of precision from the printing trade. He also studied mechanical drawing at night. Later, he worked in St. Louis and then at Brown and Sharp in Rhode Island, one of the best precision builders in the country. In 1887, at 23, he returned to Cincinnati and rented a 20 by 20 foot room on the riverfront. He hired a couple of men and started making tools for the type-making trade. The business was so small that a bank refused to open an account for him. The first shop grew too cramped, so he moved again. Then in 1891, a customer placed an order for lathes instead of type-making tools. LeBlond filled the order and realized where the real opportunity was. Not in making parts, but in building the machines that made the parts. The company nearly died in the panic of 1893, but another industrial boom saved it. Bicycles were suddenly everywhere, and manufacturers needed machines that could turn out identical steel parts at scale. LeBlond built those lathes and pivoted fully into machine tools. In 1898, the company was incorporated as R.K. LeBlond Machine Tool Company. One of the most important hires came in 1894 when a young draftsman named William Gruen joined the company. Decades later, he would help design the 2 machines that made LeBlond famous. The founder himself was the entire business in those years. Engineer, buyer, salesman, and chief designer all at once. He believed that by work alone, a man reached what he was after. He also believed a factory should be built to make the tool that makes more and better things. By the late 1890s and early 1900s, LeBlond had moved into a real plant and added patents on carriages, tailstocks, and gearboxes that made speed changes easier. Around 1905, the company was being mentioned alongside the best machine tool builders in Cincinnati. Then it began work on a machine that would change the entire auto industry. When World War I broke out, demand for machine tools exploded. The war in Europe created enormous demand for guns, shells, and the machines needed to make them. LeBlond held patents on what it called the only practical gun-boring lathe. Orders surged. By 1918, the company was shipping millions of dollars in machines and employing more than 1,000 people. The small shop that the bank had dismissed was now a major supplier to the Allied war effort. Wartime profits forced expansion. In 1917, LeBlond bought a former dairy farm in Norwood on the edge of Cincinnati and built a new factory there. It was more than a plant. The land was landscaped, the buildings were flooded with light, and the campus included locker rooms, showers, a dining hall, an infirmary, classrooms for apprentices, and grounds open to the public. A 7-year apprenticeship program turned raw teenagers into master machinists. It was an inspiring place, but it was also a form of welfare capitalism, designed in part to keep workers loyal and outside unions. Then came the Great Depression. Orders collapsed. By 1932, LeBlond's shipments had fallen by nearly 90% from their 1929 level. The company responded by shrinking its heavy industrial machines into something smaller and cheaper. In 1931, in the worst year of the Depression, it launched the Regal lathe. The Regal gave small repair shops and vocational schools features that had previously been reserved for expensive industrial machines, a fully enclosed geared headstock, automatic lubrication, and a quick change gearbox. It was rugged, safe, and affordable. The Regal did something bigger than sell machines. It trained machinists. Vocational schools across North America bought thousands of them, and a generation of American toolmakers learned on a LeBlond Regal. Later models added servo shift, allowing the operator to pre-select spindle speed with a dial and dual-drive headstocks that combined belt drive and gear drive. LeBlond's beds used a steep, hard front way and stress-relieved cast iron, which helped the machines stay accurate for decades. That is why old LeBlond iron still survives in shops today. The other half of the company's legend came from the crankshaft lathe. A crankshaft is one of the hardest engine parts to make because it is offset and irregular, yet it has to be machined perfectly. Gruen and his team solved the problem with a cam-guided automatic crankshaft lathe that could machine several journals at once in perfect synchronization. It replaced whole rows of older machines and could finish 30 to 50 crankshafts an hour. For decades, nearly every American car rolled on a crankshaft turned on a LeBlond machine. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler all used them. The company became a quiet partner of the auto industry. World War II pushed the business to its highest level. The Norwood plant ran around the clock, its grounds fenced off with barbed wire under government orders. The company shipped more than $30 million in machines in 1942 and employed over 3,000 workers, the highest output in its history. It built gun-boring lathes nearly 100 feet long and weighing more than 60 tons, machines so large they took 2 railroad cars to ship. These were the tools of the arsenal of democracy. Richard Knight LeBlond had stepped back by then, handing the presidency to his son in 1940 after more than 50 years at the helm. He died in 1953 at 88, still sketching lathe designs near the end of his life. His son carried the business into the post-war boom, when LeBlond machines filled factories, schools, and arsenals around the world. The company even built some of the earliest numerical control lathes, including a continuous path machine developed with General Electric in 1960. But the company also had a habit of wandering outside its core. It once created an aircraft engine subsidiary which turned into a loss and was later sold. The lesson was simple. LeBlond was strongest when it stayed close to the iron it understood best. That lesson mattered because a bigger technological change was coming. Starting in the 1950s, machine tools were no longer just about the hand of a skilled machinist. Numerical control, then CNC, moved the intelligence of the work into programs and controllers. A factory in Japan could now match work that had taken American companies generations to perfect. Japanese builders, backed by national investment, moved quickly into CNC and sold machines that were cheaper, more reliable, and easier to order. American machine tool makers, LeBlond included, were slow to adapt. The results were devastating. Across the industry, sales collapsed in the early 1980s. By the mid-1980s, most numerically controlled machines sold in the US were imports. Half the American machine tool companies disappeared. LeBlond survived, but the plant in Norwood was old and badly suited to the new computer-controlled era. The company's legacy had become an anchor. So the family sold. In 1981, Japan's Makino milling machine bought into the company. By 1987, it owned the family's remaining shares, and the business became LeBlond Makino Machine Tool Company. The old family was gone from ownership. The Regal line moved production to Singapore in the early 1980s, and the old plant in Norwood was abandoned in 1989. By the mid-1990s, manual lathes were fading from the market, and Makino decided the LeBlond name no longer had value. In 1996, the company became simply Makino Incorporated, and the family name was removed from the door. The Norwood site was later redeveloped into Rookwood Commons, a shopping center with restaurants, stores, and parking. The original brick smokestack was left standing. Even after the company changed hands and the old factory came down, the iron itself kept working. LeBlond machines were built so heavily that they refused to wear out. Decades later, tens of thousands were still cutting metal in shops around the world. In 1997, people who knew the machines started a company to keep them alive, and in 1998 it became LeBlond Limited. It gathered original blueprints, microfilm, archives, and parts, and eventually began making new manual lathes again under the initials RKL for Richard Knight LeBlond. What made LeBlond different from a generic machine builder was the way it treated accuracy as a manufacturing culture rather than a single selling point. The company did not just assemble lathes and hope the numbers held. It designed the castings, the carriage geometry, the spindle systems, and the work holding around the idea that a machine should stay true after years of vibration, chips, coolant, and abuse. That mattered in the shops that bought its equipment, because a lathe that drifts a few thousandths of an inch can turn a good part into scrap long before anyone notices the cause. LeBlond earned loyalty by making its machines repeat themselves. That approach also explains why the company mattered so much in education. Schools that taught machining needed equipment sturdy enough for inexperienced hands and accurate enough to teach real standards. A student could learn facing, turning, threading, and measuring on a LeBlond Regal and come away with habits that still made sense in production shops. The machine was not only a tool for making parts, it was a teaching instrument, and that made the company part of the pipeline for American manufacturing talent. The same logic ran through the war years. Large industrial contracts did not just reward output, they rewarded confidence. A gun barrel, a shell component, or a crankshaft had no value if the machine making it lost alignment halfway through a run. LeBlond's reputation let it keep its place in those contracts, because buyers knew the machines could be trusted under pressure. The company's larger lathe frames, heavy castings, and practical design choices were all a response to the same demand. Make the machine stable enough that the operator can focus on the part instead of fighting the tool. The post-war shift to CNC exposed a deeper weakness in the American machine tool industry as a whole. The old companies had been built around the craft of a machinist and the wisdom of a factory floor. The new world required electronics, software, servos, and systems integration. That transition was hard enough for large capital-rich firms. For older builders with aging plants, it was brutal. LeBlond's Norwood site had been excellent for an era of big iron and manual production, but it was not the kind of place that could be modernized quickly without enormous expense. In that sense, the company's history was tied to the industrial geography of Cincinnati itself. Once the region stopped being the center of machine tool gravity, the old plant became harder to justify. Even so, the parts and knowledge did not vanish. When enthusiasts and preservationists began keeping the brand alive, they were really preserving a kind of mechanical memory. Blueprints, microfilm, and old castings mattered because they carried design choices that could still be useful in modern work. Some machines never become obsolete in the ordinary sense. They simply become specialized. A well-built manual lathe remains valuable in repair work, prototyping, and small batch production because it gives a skilled operator direct control without layers of software between the hand and the cut. That is why LeBlond's ending is not just a story of loss. It is also a story of survival through use. Companies disappear when nobody remembers what made them useful. LeBlond resisted that fate because machinists continued to use the machines, rebuild them, and talk about them as standards. The smokestack in Norwood became a symbol of the gap between the factory that once stood there and the retail center that replaced it. But the machines themselves kept working far beyond the life of the site. That is a different kind of afterlife, one built not from nostalgia, but from steel that refused to quit. There's also a reason the LeBlond name still carries weight among people who actually run lathes. The brand was tied to a very specific idea of dignity in work. A machine should not just cut metal, it should make the operator feel that the cut is under control. That is a subtle thing, but in a shop it matters. When a machine starts cleanly, holds its line, and finishes without fuss, the user tends to trust it more deeply than a sales brochure could ever explain. LeBlond earned that trust in the years when American manufacturing still believed the machine tool was the place where skill, discipline, and repeatability met. Even after the company changed ownership, that memory stayed attached to the iron. That is the arc of the story. A poor printer's son, turned away by a bank, built a company that armed 2 world wars, put a crankshaft in nearly every American car for half a century, and trained generations of machinists. The company grew too proud of its own iron to see the future, then was bought and erased by the very revolution it missed. But the machines outlived the empire. The smokestack still stands. The name came back. The iron remained.